It's just preparing to live stream, so it's just telling us what it's doing.
Okay.
I'll let you know once we're live.
Okay.
Not yet. Oh. Okay. We are live now, so that's good. Okay. Sorry. Okay, welcome everybody. Let me see if we have people showing up here already. I'm just checking my other screen here real quick. Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Olivia Masters and I am the wildlife viewing specialist at Wildlife Viewing Yukon. And tonight we're going to be talking all about mushrooms. I know there's lots of keen mushroom enthusiasts in the Yukon. And in the past, we've had lots of people interested in this. So we decided to make it a Facebook Live this time around so that we can hopefully get more people watching tonight. So first things first, I have a bunch of cool mushroom guides. This one being, I think, my favorite with the trumpet mushroom man on the front. Really great information in this one. But there's a whole bunch of other mushroom books out there. Actually, I have more, tons of them. Basically, mushroom books are great. If you have one mushroom book, awesome. If you have more than one, even better. Just because the mushrooms vary from area to area, so you want to make sure you're actually looking at the right species. And also, if you're interested in mushrooms, get out there with somebody who knows what they're doing and they can teach you. A mushroom book alone probably won't help you all that much. Also, Yukon Wildlife Viewing has put out this lovely Common Yukon Mushrooms Guide. This is free. You can pick this up at the Department of Environment or any tourism office like Visitor Information Center. But just know this does not tell you what is poisonous and what is not poisonous. This is just the common ones that you'll find around the Yukon on the trails that you may be walking. So if you're looking for more information, you need to go out with people who know what they're talking about. So on that note, I'm going to introduce everybody to Sam Skinner. He is the local mushroom enthusiast, mushroom man of the Yukon. So he can teach us a little bit more. And if anybody has questions, please just put them down on the chat column there below the Facebook Live thingy. And I will be taking note and we will get to the questions. And hopefully this works for everybody. So take it away, Sam.
Great. Thanks, Olivia. Yeah, I'm excited to do this. It's something that I've done for the last 10 or so years, taking people out on mushroom walks with the Wildlife Viewing Program and with other organizations. And yeah, but of course, last year with COVID, I haven't done it. And this format is new to me. So bear with us as we sort things out. I like to be interactive and talk to my audience, but with this Facebook Live via Zoom, or vice versa, I don't get that feedback right away. So I'll be winging that, my usual approach. So yeah, several years ago, many years ago, I got a master's in mycology, which is the study of fungus. And this is the disclaimer part of the evening. Part of that was the study of mushrooms. And my master's looked at some other kind of arcane questions in the world of fungus. So I feel like I have good mushroom training. It's not my day job, so like many of you, it's more of a hobby. But I've been doing it for a while. But probably as you might have a lot of questions that I won't be able to answer right away. But I'll just kind of impart some of my knowledge, but hopefully more my enthusiasm and interest, because I think mushrooms are super cool. Yeah. Yep, I got a PowerPoint, and hopefully it'll show you some good things. And I'll probably reiterate a lot of the knowledge that Olivia started off with, and that's good to hear again, I think. So I will just share my screen. Hang on. Okay. All right. Can we see that? Getting the nod from Olivia. All right. Good. So, all right. So, yeah, I usually like to ask the audience questions about their experience and what have you. I don't know if you can interact via Olivia in the chat, but I just want to get a handle of how many people collect mushrooms already or already looking at mushrooms? Oh, you're muted there. Olivia, you're muted.
Sorry. Way to go, Olivia. So I don't have any question or nobody's answered yet, but I do know that we have Rachel from Faro watching and Melissa. I'm not sure she commented as well. And Rachel, she just grows mushrooms at home.
Wow, that's
and
cool.
Lori she's trying to ID mushrooms.
Right. All right. So a few different levels of interest and background. So yeah, this talk is sort of geared to absolute beginners, and I find that a lot of people get into mushrooms because they're interested in eating them. So this is where I usually ask people watching how many people are interested in eating, and everyone usually puts up their hand. And that's great because there's quite a lot of mushrooms in the Yukon that are edible and that are pretty good for beginners to identify. But also, I think one of my goals is for people just to appreciate mushrooms. So if you don't want to go out there and eat stuff, that's fine. You can go out and see mushrooms and just see how cool they are. In fact, that's probably a good way to go about it. Is I suggest people go out and observe mushrooms and slowly get more comfortable with what they look like and the range of diversity, etc. Anyway, so usually people come to these kind of things because they want to know what they can eat. But I like to back up, maybe it's my background, and talk about the life cycle of mushrooms and their biology a bit, because I think it's really interesting. But it's also will help you pick for the table, or pick if you want to eat. It'll help you search out and find some, because if you know what they're doing in the environment, you can kind of guess where they're going to be. So here is a little animation. There's two kinds of mushrooms in general in the world. There's saprobic mushrooms. These are the ones that rot things, and thank goodness they rot things, because otherwise our boreal forest around the Yukon would be just covered in sticks that aren't being rotted away. Fungus are the #1 rotters out there. So imagine we're out in the boreal forest, and you can see my mouse here, right? And here's a stump, and here's a log nearby. And imagine there's a mushroom growing on it, on this one stump here. Now, the underside of mushrooms is, as you might know, the gills, typically in the grocery store mushrooms, that's where the spores come out. So here we see some spores coming out. They fall down, and the wind comes up and blows them over, and then they land on this log here, all right? So this isn't to scale. Those spores are microscopic, really. Now, if we zoom in here, and here's our spore, it will germinate into the log, and it'll grow these little tubes. This is the cells of fungus are actually little tubes all knit together. So that one of these, that's called a hypha, but a whole bunch of it will form this mycelium, this thing that's living inside the wood. So it's slowly creeping into the wood, and as it goes, it degrades or rots the wood and absorbs things. And maybe another spore from another mushroom's doing the same thing over here. And they slowly get bigger and bigger and rot the wood, and they're digesting the wood. It's like they're eating it. And so they slowly grow. Their mycelium gets bigger and bigger within the wood. And sometimes they bump into each other. And when that happens, that's the sexual part of the life cycle there. And they'll continue to rot together, and they'll exchange their genetic information. And then from that, this part grows another mushroom. So that's the life cycle of a saprobic mushroom in a nutshell. And so for that person in the audience that grows mushrooms, all mushroom growers grow saprobic mushrooms, the ones that rot and degrade things. So usually you use, commercial operations will use horse manure, and it will be rotting manure and straw and sawdust and sometimes whole logs. A lot of the mushrooms around the boreal forest, like in the Yukon, are symbiotic with trees and shrubs. And usually they have these structures called Ectomycorrhizae. That's a big word. Ecto means on the outside, myco means a fungus, and rhizae means roots. So I'll show you why it's named that in a sec. But imagine we have a nice proud spruce tree here with some roots in the soil. And again, there's a mushroom growing nearby. And again, the spores fall down. These are different species altogether than the rotting mushrooms. And the wind blows them over and then they germinate. So I'm going to zoom in on these two roots here underground. And here's a spore here, and it's going through the soil. Maybe it's rotting stuff in the soil, spruce needles perhaps, but what it's really looking for are some roots. And so it'll come across a root tip in the soil, and I like to say it knits a sock around the tip of the root. And that's called the Ectomycorrhizae, outside fungal root. And it's there that this fungus, this mycelium here, can trade nutrients that it can extract from the soil very efficiently with the root, with the tree. And the tree, with its needles up in the light, uses photosynthesis and makes sugars, and then it trades with the fungus through there. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship. So this thing here will start growing much faster once it starts trading with the tree roots. So something like that happens over here with this other. Oh, all right. And like before, the mycelium will meet up, and that the sexual part of the life cycle will happen again, and then a mushroom will grow up. So once again, these would be different species. And why I'm starting here is because first of all, I think it's cool. But if most mushroom species that are mycorrhizal are specific to one species of woody plant or a family of them. So you might find some that are only around aspen. So if you know they're in season, you might be driving by and see an aspen stand and think, oh, I'm going to go there after work and pick those mushrooms up. So you can save a lot of time and energy by knowing what kind of plants they hang out with. And it can also help you identify them. So if you dig around in the duff, under the moss in our boreal forest, you can pull up some roots of the neighboring trees, and you can see sometimes some of these Ectomycorrhizae. It looks like moldy root tips, really. If you zoom in under a microscope, sometimes the tree roots will branch and form these funny branched systems here, but the yellow stuff is actually a fungus growing on the outside of them. You can see some hyphae here on the outside. So that's an Ectomycorrhizae. So everyone asks, well, if I'm picking mushrooms for the table to eat, how can you tell if they're poisonous or edible? And I'll just go ahead and answer my own question here. Normally I ask, and everyone has some good ideas, but the short answer is that there's no one thing that's written on the mushrooms that tells you if they're edible or not. So unfortunately, you got to know something, but that comes with just a little bit of practice and observations. And you don't need to know every single species in the Yukon. You don't need to know everything there is to know about mushrooms, but you need to know that there are poisonous mushrooms in the Yukon and pretty much everywhere you go. But I want you to go carefully, not confidently, carefully, but slowly grow your confidence, and anyone can learn a few good edible mushrooms if they care to, but don't rush into it. So many Yukon mushrooms are not edible. First of all, not edible doesn't necessarily mean poisonous, but often they would be. A lot of Yukon mushrooms, if you tasted them, would taste horrible, and you'd not proceed any further. You wouldn't bother cooking them up because they would taste horrible. Some are very woody and tough. Again, you wouldn't want to eat much of those. Some are super duper tiny. No one would bother with those. So a lot are considered not edible. It doesn't mean they'll kill you. But a lot will cause gastrointestinal distress. So that's a fancy way of saying it'll give you a tummy ache. And other people I've heard will say that it causes you to leak out of both ends. So that's a bit graphic, but you know what I mean when you go there, when I say that. There's some mushrooms that will give you much more severe poisoning. One cure for some of these types of poisoning is a liver transplant. So it's serious business with those ones. And that's if you're lucky. There are deadly poisonous mushrooms around. Of course, there's the kinds that make you hallucinate. There's a few species of those. One anyway in the Yukon that I am aware of, and more down towards Alaska, coastal Alaska. Allergies. So, fungus mushrooms are very diverse. It's a whole branch from the tree of life, just like plants are a branch. So to say that you can eat mushrooms and you're not allergic to mushrooms is like saying I'm not allergic to plants because I ate a plant once and it's okay. But of course, some people can eat lettuce but not peanuts. Some people are sensitive to different things. So just because you can eat one species of mushroom doesn't mean you can tolerate all edible species of mushrooms. So treat even a mushroom that is considered edible, always try a little bit to see if maybe you're allergic to it. And then this one is, well, picking mushrooms for the table, you got to use common sense and trust. You got to build trust in yourself and who you're with. And part of the common sense is food poisoning and rot. Some people get so carried away that they will carried away with the excitement of baskets of mushrooms that they'll kind of push the rotten end of the spectrum a bit. So that's something to be aware of. Having said that, it's a fact that if you're picking mushrooms from the wild for the table, inevitably you'll get a little maggot in there. Little worms like to live in them, and that's part of their role in the food chain of arboreal forests. And that's not appetizing, admittedly, but it's sort of inevitable. And so you just go with what you can tolerate. Some people can't stand the thought of even one or two. I personally just kind of happens. Right. And while I'm talking about this, I'll confess I've poisoned myself once eating mushrooms, but I knew what I was getting into. So I knew exactly what species it was, and it was described as being very delicious, and it was a very beautiful mushroom. So it kind of won me over. But it also said some people can't tolerate it. So it's sort of somewhere in this allergy department, and it would, if you're allergic to it, it causes gastrointestinal distress. So I tried a little bit and it was delicious. And what you need to do is when you're trying something new is just eat a little bit cooked. And it was so good. I ate probably more than a little bit, not a lot. And I wasn't feeling great the next day, but I kind of knew what was coming, and I knew I wasn't gonna, it wasn't gonna be too bad. So how to tell if it's edible? Olivia went over some of this, but get a good guidebook and a friend. There's a group on Facebook called Yukon Shroomers. I don't really do Facebook typically, so I'm not too active there, but there's sort of a group of people there. And a friend that knows more than you is ideal, but sometimes you don't have anybody like that. But if you learn with a friend, that's better than nobody. So sometimes books will talk about a mushroom that has cigar brown spores. I'll talk about spores a bit later, but what do you mean by cigar brown? So one person might say, well, that's chocolate brown and that one's rusty brown. And so you can talk about these things, and it's sometimes good to see the world through more eyes than what you have. So this is, Olivia talked about this book. That's a good one. Oh, yeah, there's another book here that I like. And then like I said before, it's good to go on many walks and look at the mushrooms. And so you need to build a little bit of experience about the range of many different species out there, so you can kind of get a feel for the range of different colors. And even mushrooms of the same species look different depending on the environment they're growing in. Just like people, we're all the same species, but there's little kids, there's older people, and there's people. Yeah, everyone looks a bit different. And it's if you're interested in, it's good to pick one or two beginners mushrooms or readily identified mushrooms and kind of focus on those and build your confidence with one or two species after a while. So this is what I mean by these are two mushrooms of the same species. And to mushroom pickers, it's kind of obvious they're in the same species, but maybe when you're in beginning, you might not know that because they're so different shaped. The pattern on the stem is a little different, but with a bit of experience by walking around throughout the summer, you might see mushrooms earlier in June that look like that, and you come back a few days later and they might look like that. And then you start building these associations in your mind. You might realize, aha, this is a young one. We'll talk about the stages a bit later too. All right, so how do we identify mushrooms? And I guess I'll just go ahead and go through some of the features. Normally I get people to shout them out because everybody knows a few things. Few Yukoners know all these things already, but you can break it down roughly by physical features and environmental features. I've mentioned a few already. So you can look at the color of the cap. That's the thing on top. The color of the gills, or the spore-bearing structure underneath. The stem and the staining. And I'm going to get into more detail on those things later. The texture of the cap, gills, and stem. So is it bumpy, slimy, smooth, striate? That means it's got little lines in it. We'll show some more examples of that. The underside of the cap where the spores came from can be gills, sponge, or spines. Again, I'll show some pictures of that. You can smell mushrooms. That's always safe to do. And I can't do that with you today, obviously, but it's fascinating smelling mushrooms. Some smell a bit like anise. Often they're sweet. They almost always smell a bit like mushrooms, no surprise there, but sometimes you get these bitter smells or some that smell like corn silk. I know of one that smells a bit like maraschino cherries, and so it's pretty interesting. Now, taste is another one. I don't say you should go out and do that. You use your own free will, common sense, and typically I would just do it if often if you go through a book and you've narrowed it down to 2 or 3 species, say, and the book says that one will taste peppery, whereas the other one will taste mild, then it's typically safe to taste a little bit, like a match head worth, and you can get a sense for the taste that way, and then you can spit it out. That's something I typically do. The texture, so how it breaks, if it just kind of breaks into little cubical pieces, or if it kind of just bends or is a bit rubbery or cartilaginous. These are all useful things to see. And microscopic features, that's kind of beyond what most of us do. I have a microscope, but I seldom use it. It's a lot of work, but the size, shape, and coloration of spores is sometimes important. Some of the other features. So yeah, physical features. The environment, like I mentioned before, that's why I started with the whole life cycle thing. Is it in a wet or dry place? Look at the ecology. Are you up in the alpine, or are you in the lowland forests? Substrate, so that's what is it growing on? Is it growing out of wood or roots or soil? If it's growing out of soil, it could be either saprobic or mycorrhizal. You don't really know without a bit of experience in reading those books, but have a look around at the surrounding woody species. So pine trees will have different mushrooms growing under them than spruce trees, and deciduous trees as well. time of year. So oyster mushrooms around here, for example, are one of the early ones. Morels, of course, come early in the Yukon. And then now in this time of year, we probably get typically get quite a diversity of different mushrooms in the fall. And oh yeah, talked about dominant plant species already. Any burning questions there, Olivia, or should I just keep trooping on?
I think you can keep going. I don't have any questions in the comments yet. So if
Okay.
anybody does have questions though, please post them and we'll answer them.
Okay. Yeah. And yeah, like I said before, it takes a bit of experience to, build your experience, because every individual will have a bit of variability depending on where they're going. And typically if it's hot, dry weather, sometimes the top of the cap will crack, and that'll give it a really different look than in wetter conditions. So parts of the mushroom, I mentioned some of those already. Here's an Agaricus mushroom, one that will often grow in grass around the Yukon. So this is a kind of a stereotypical mushroom. Not every mushroom will have all these parts, but you'll see a cap. Sometimes there'll be scales or striations on top. There's gills underneath, or spines or tubes. I can show some examples later. You can look on the stem for a ring or an annulus. You can see it here. And the shape of that ring, some mushrooms, if they have a ring, will sometimes they'll hang down like a skirt. Sometimes they'll face upward. And sometimes they'll just be just a ring around it, like what's shown in the photograph. And then you'll see the stem. And some mushrooms, not too many, will have a vulva or a cup at the bottom. This one does not have one. And then you might look at the base of the stem for mycelial threads. Some mushrooms will have like a taproot, or some will stick to the soil very tightly, and others will just pop out. So that's something else to look for in the field. Yeah, so these are 3 different species of mushrooms, and they all have gills. And so when you're looking at gills, you can look at the color of the gills. You can look at how they attach to the stem. So that's this area here versus here and here. So this is an example of decurrent gills. So these are that's a technical term, but these are gills that kind of run down the side of the stem. This one would be notched gills. So when they approach the stem, they kind of indent a bit. So that's called a notch. And this one has a bit of a notch too, but it's not quite as distinctly notched as well. You can also look for if the gills are smooth or kind of toothed. Typically they're smooth, but not always. This one here, I should have zoomed in on it, but some mushrooms produce branched gills. You can see one branch here, it kind of forks, starts off as one near the stem and then it splits into 2. Other species might have splotches, so look for little dots on the gill. This mushroom does not have gills. This is a Aspen Bullet, very typical, fairly easily identified edible around the Yukon. So you don't see the gills here. What you do see is tiny little pores, little holes here. So that's one example. And here's another. This is a slippery jack. It has much larger pores here. So you look at the size of those pores, and out of the pores come spores, of course. So loosely speaking, all mushrooms that have holes in them are put in this loose group called boletes. And there's different subgroups within that, but you might hear people talking about boletes. This is a slippery jack. It's not a true, it's in the bolete family, as is this one here, but it's not the true bolete. Here is a hawkswing, and if you zoom into the underside of the mushroom, you'll see these little spines here. So at casual glances, they look like holes sometimes, but if you look up close, you can see their little spines. Some of them are broken off here. Another nice thing I like to have, not always to identify mushrooms, but just to observe the whole submicroscopic world, or almost microscopic world, is a hand lens. You can pick these up. It's like a fancy magnifying glass. Even a magnifying glass will help, but you can get these at mining supply shops or rock supply shops, and you can grab a mushroom and zoom in close, like get your eye close to the mushroom and get the lens close to your eye like that, and it'll open up a whole world under the lens. It'll look more like that in that case. Yeah, and here's a few kind of oddballs. This is related to lion's mane. It's not a true lion's mane, but it grows around whitehorse. Beautiful mushroom. I love that one. There's these things called earth tongues, and there's club fungus and coral fungi that grow all around the Yukon. And they're the spores come out of these different structures. They're not a classic mushroom shape, but they're all fungi, and they all have a life cycle like what I mentioned earlier. This one is a wood rotter here. You can see it's growing out of this log. Now, yeah, and then you can look at the stem. First of all, does it have a ring around it? I talked a bit about rings. And then you can look at the texture of it. It's smooth and white. There's no granules or bumps. You can look at the top of the cap. Is it slimy or smooth? See some maybe striations here, little faint lines, but not super strong. This is a Rislas. I might go back to this slide a bit later, but yeah. Now this is another species altogether, and it's got striate, or you can kind of see the hyphae almost on the stem. There's these lines that run down the length of the stem. So you might call that a striate stem. This mushroom is an Aspen Bullet. I showed it to you earlier. Or a scaber stalk is the name for this group of fungus. So these black bumps here are called scabers. So they actually stick out a bit, and they have a dark color. And when they're young like that, the bumps are all crowded together. They haven't been stretched apart, and they're less black. So look at the texture of the stem. This is a bit blurry, but this is a true bullet that do grow in some parts of the Yukon and in Alaska. This is a king bullet. Very nice edible if you find it. And if you zoom in on the stem, it gets this netted pattern. Looks like a net kind of raised up, sticking out of the surface of the stem. Now, I kind of alluded to this before, but mushrooms, when they come out of the ground, are different than when they fully develop. So these are 3 examples of button mushrooms, Agaricus, and their ring forms a veil, it's called. Their ring is still attached to the edge of the mushroom cap. Now, normally I like to do my mushroom dance at this point, my development dance. I'm not sure if I can do it, but maybe I'll do it with my hands instead. So when they come out of the ground, they're like, this is the stem here. They're like this. And then as they grow, the cap opens up like that, and it rips open this membrane around and leaves a remnant of it on the stem. So that's where the rings come from, if a mushroom has rings. So if these were to continue growing and open up from the button stage, they'd form an adult that looks like this. This is a big mature cap. They don't always get that big. That was a nice find that we had in Carcross at a walk a few years ago. And which reminds me that you can't really use the size of a mushroom necessarily to help you identify a mushroom, because this one is typically half that size. That would just have to be a really big one. And sometimes so one species can grow all different sizes depending on how happy they are. Of course, some mushrooms tend to be bigger than others.
So Sam, we just have a comment from Virginia. She is encouraging the mushroom dance.
Oh, the mushroom. Okay. Okay. I don't know how to do that. Let's see. It's not really a dance. More like a miming or something. Let's see. No, there's a lamp in the way.
Oh no.
Yeah. Anyway, I just kind of go like this. I'm the mushroom, and as I grow, I come out of the ground, and so I'm a button, and then my cap slowly expands here, and then the veil rips open, and then the cap sticks out like that. And some mushrooms will form, their caps will go up and form a funnel shape when they're fully mature. Others are always domed, some are just flat. So that's another thing to look for. And of course, when the veil breaks, it'll leave a ring, a distinctive ring on the bottom. So it's not really a dance, but I suppose a performance of sorts.
I love it. Thank you.
So there you go. Okay, so back to the show. Here are my kids with two different sizes of mushrooms. Looks like they're different species, but they can get quite big. And I encourage kids to look at mushrooms and understand that they shouldn't eat them, but I encourage them just to pick them up and smell them and check them out. You know, if you're not comfortable with that, you might want to wash your hands before you eat, but it's always safe to handle mushrooms. You're not going to get sick by just touching them. And talking about sizes of mushrooms, sometimes you run out of room in your car when they get really big, and you have to put them on the roof rack to get them home. That's a king bullet. Other times they're very small. Look at, I had to get in close. They're just growing out of these, well, they're liverworts actually, but this is a spruce needle for comparative. So you get it, these are different species, of course, but it's pretty cool. There's a huge range of sizes of mushrooms. You'll read about staining and you'll see it. It's a very common thing to see in some species of mushrooms in the Yukon. Or it's a feature of common species in the Yukon. So some slippery jack mushrooms, especially in the Yukon, or in boletes in general, when you crack them open, they'll be bright yellow like this, and then you'll count to 3 or 5, and they'll turn blue like that. So that's a staining reaction. And so some books will ask you to look for staining reactions and what color they go. So typically they go this blue color, but you can see them turn red, and there's different colors as well. This is a Lactarius mushroom. This species is not edible, but there is a Lactarius in the Yukon that's delicious. But all Lactarius, if they're kind of young and healthy and not too dry, will bleed this kind of milky stuff. You see the milk coming out of the gills. You really want to see it. You snap the cap, and incidentally, the texture of Lactarius is very brittle, so it'll kind of just snap. And you should see right along the edge of the gills and the cap, you can see this milk stuff oozing out. The orange delicious, I'll talk about that later, bleeds this milky stuff too, but it's neon orange. And so that's a distinctive character that you look for. This is a woolly Lactarius for obvious reasons. It's pretty cool. Often subalpine. Here is, I showed you this one already, but this one has a nice veil that's just ripping open. So you can see that the veil is partly intact on one side, and it's ripped open on this side. You might see a little bit of tattered veil hanging down. Yeah, this is just another shot of related species. You can see the veils just ripping open there. Another genus of mushroom that is very common in the Yukon. Yeah, on the walks I talk about, what do I say? I say you're not going to identify every species in the Yukon, but there's a few genera. So as a biologist, when I talk about a genera, I'm talking about more than one genus, which most people would talk about as a family of mushrooms. So I'll just say family. That's not scientifically correct, but there's one, say, family of mushrooms called Cortinarius that is very common. None of them are really edible. some are quite poisonous, and they're impossible to identify as species. But there's a few shortcuts. If you can identify that it's in this broad family quickly, then you can move on with your day, and you could save a lot of time if you're beginning. So Cortinarius are defined by their cortina. This is not the best picture, but in a way it is. This is kind of a typical one that you'll see. You can kind of see it has a ring around it, but what you really notice is that there's a zone above where you get the cinnamon color and not cinnamon color. And that's because it's got this, looks like cobwebs, little hairs up here. And the spores are cinnamon color, and they fall out and they get caught on these cobwebs. And before it opens, the veil is not a membrane, but is this cobwebby kind of structure underneath that protects the gills. So if you see cobwebby stuff underneath, it's a Cortinarius. And you can probably save a lot of time by just ignoring it or just checking it out and seeing how wonderful it is, but not eating it. Or if it's a bit more mature, you sometimes have to look very carefully for these little wisps of cobwebs. And if it's quite a bit older, you might not see them at all, but that's Cortinarius. I'm going to back up a little bit, a few slides. I should have earlier. Apologies. There. Okay, so another similar family of mushrooms is called Rislas. And Rislas, there's several species in the Yukon, and they're very common and large and enticing for beginner mushroom pickers. And I typically say, well, in general, they're not edible. There's a few exceptions to that. There's some mushrooms in the Rislas family that people will pickle. Last year I pickled some for the first time, and they're quite good. And the pickling process helps draw out any toxins in this one group. But in general, I say they're best just avoided. They don't have a lot of flavor. And Rislas, if you want to identify them quickly to that major group so that you can ignore them and not spend any more time, they, like those Lactarius, the milky ones, the ones that produce milk, are very brittle. So if you grab the stem and snap it, it'll snap like chalk. It typically has white or almost white gills and a smooth stem. And after that, there's all different shapes and sizes, but this is a kind of a typical one. They'll have a smooth cap, no warts or spines or bumps. But the cap can be funnel shaped, or they can be dome shaped like this one. And they can be dark brown, they can be colorful. There's Risula medica, that's one that makes you throw up violently, that has a red cap and white underside. So I'm not giving you a very clear picture maybe of Rislas, but if they snap like chalk, no milk, and a white or pale gills and a pale stem, that's a hallmark of a Risula. And so for most people, that's enough, and you can move on. But they are very, very pretty. They can be purple, orange, red. There's dark black. There's these black ones that erupt out of the soil. So it's something you'll see a lot of in the Yukon. So again, that's Risula. So I'll skip back to where it was. Right. All right. This is fly agaric. It's a mushroom that does occur in the Yukon. It's there's a lot of lore around that. You see these in fairy books. They're very pretty and beautiful, but I'm just talking about the texture of the cap. I mentioned before, sometimes you see striations, sometimes you see these warts. Sometimes you look for sliminess, and that depends on how rainy it's been. So sometimes mushrooms described as slimy won't be slimy if it happens to be really dry out. These two, I think, well, they might not be, but often this species will start off quite red like this, but with age, they'll lose color. So that's another example of it's good to know and observe a mushroom as it develops. They're looking at all the different stages. Another thing that you can do, that this is going a little far for most beginner mushroomers, but it's kind of cool for artistically and biologically, but you can get spore prints. So what you can do is get a mushroom cap, or get a mushroom and then cut or pull the stem out, and then now you have a cap. And then if it's not for art, or if I really don't know what color the spores are going to be, I put it on newsprint or old photocopied paper with a lot of black and white. And then I put a yogurt container over top of that. And the yogurt container keeps even little wisps of air from blowing underneath that mushroom. And so the spores fall straight down onto the paper and leave a spore print. And so you get home from a mushroom walk and set that up, one yogurt container per mushroom, and you leave it overnight. And many, not all mushrooms will leave you a spore print to look at in the morning. So I like to put it on black and white paper because, of course, if the spores are white, they'll show up on the black part. And if they are dark, it'll show up on the light part. You can look at the gill color and you'll get a sense for what the spore color will be, but sometimes it's a surprise. Young Agaricus mushrooms typically have white to pink gills, nice pretty color. But when they mature and produce spores, the spore color is similar to this, maybe a little more chocolatey, not black. But you can see over here a range, it's a bit pixelated, but a range of different colors. And then, yeah, here's one of a more pale color on a dark background. And you can make spore prints onto cardstock and then fix it by spraying it with a clear coat and make cards with it if you like. And that's cool in and of itself, but I will collect spores in my notebook, and so I get a sense for the spore color, and that'll greatly help you identify which genus or family it's in. And this is a deer mushroom, I think it is. Pink gills and kind of browny pink spores there. And oh yeah, another feature I mentioned that's beyond what most beginners will have is microscopic view of the spores and other microscopic structures. So with a good microscope, you can get a sense for how long and skinny they are, whether they're spherical or oblong, and what the dimensions are. Is it 15 micrometers or 2 micrometers? And you can zoom in, and it's not great, but you can kind of see they look a little bit bumpy or spiny, these ones. Some spores will have an oil drop at one end, so you kind of look for different features like that. And some species of mushrooms, you can only identify the species based on their spores. But usually when amateurs get there, they can get it. They say, well, I don't know which one it is, but neither one's edible. So who cares, kind of thing. Or maybe they both are edible, so you don't really need to know that. But it's kind of interesting to know. Another mushroom that, yeah, I'll just show a few kind of not mushroomy mushrooms that most Yukoners will be familiar with. Here's some puffballs. Thought I had a puffball. Anyway, puffballs, I think, well, look in the books that you get, but I think all puffballs in the Yukon are edible. If you cut them open and they're pure white, then they are edible. If you cut them open and they're starting to turn yellow or green, then that means they're too old to be eaten. So you want the really young ones, and you can cook them up like tofu, cube them up. And of course, when they get really old, you step on them and their spores go shooting out, and that's how they disperse their spores. A lot of fun for kids. And of course, we all know morels. There's several species shown here with a few things in for scale. And they come in, actually, you can find morels anywhere, pretty much anywhere in the Yukon, usually in early summer. But of course, they really come in after forest fires and in commercial quantities. But I've kind of found them in all different environments, especially where there's been trees that have been disturbed fire is a big disturbance, but floods and cutting trees. I've seen them grow next to brand new trails. So the trail cutting has disturbed the trees just enough to trigger the mushrooms to come up. This is in an elf saddle. It's loosely related to morels, and it's related more closely to false morels. So it looks pretty different than a true morel, but also pretty cool. And a few years ago at one of my walks, we found some truffles. Not most truffles in the Yukon are not considered really edible, but there are truffles here. In fact, the first truffle I saw with my own eyes in the Yukon was found by my son when he was 3 or 4. He just found it on the ground and asked me what it is. But around this time of year, you can go out walking in the boreal forest and see little kind of disturbances in the soil under conifers. And I think I haven't seen it because they don't stay up late enough, but I think those are flying squirrels or just regular squirrels digging them up, using their noses to smell them ripening under the ground. So flying squirrels, I know, really like them, but I think any squirrel will go after them. And so truffles don't grow in the mushroom shape. They're like little balls that grow in the soil, and they typically release some kind of smell. And you might not be able to smell them, but some animal will. And the animal will dig them up and eat them and then do their business somewhere else. And that's how they get spread around. So that's why the culinary truffles of Europe and North America have a nice distinctive aroma. And I think I found 2 species so far, but they're pretty, yeah, you can imagine why they're hard to find. And then one thing I like to find, not to eat, is slime molds. So there's all different kinds. And if you want to study slime molds, you usually go to the mycology department or the fungus department of a university, but they're more related to animals. And they're kind of weird things. They're amoebas, basically, they creep around rotting things as they go in the duff on rotting logs or on needles. And then when triggered by rain in the fall, they all get together and form these brooding masses that are often brightly colored and distinctive like that. And it's sort of like a big rave for these amoeba things. They all get together and form these fruiting structures, these things, and then their spores go out and then it starts all over again. So yeah, those are cool things to look for. And sometimes they're pure white, but usually they have a bit of color to them. This is a weird thing that, yeah, I mentioned before that in dry conditions, you might get cracks on the top of your mushroom. Sometimes mushrooms will just not develop properly. Here's one that grew a cap and then decided to grow an upside down cap on top. So if you were to look for that in any mushroom book, you'd never see that. That's just a weird developmental anomaly. And so just be aware that what you're found in the forest and you're looking might not be typical of anything. So don't sweat it if you can't see what you're seeing in the book that you're looking at. So I'll just talk about a few beginner mushrooms, I call them. There's probably about 10 kind of beginner edible mushrooms in the Yukon, but I hesitate to call any mushroom a beginner mushroom. I think it's always prudent and wise to go out and familiarize yourself with mushrooms in general, and then kind of build your confidence. But one is this orange delicious. It's a Lactarius. It's kind of typically orange, but often with this kind of unappetizing, pallid kind of green color. It reminds me of like a oxidized copper a little bit. And you flip it over and the gills are orangey. And if you break the cap or the stem, you might see this neon orange, and that's that milky stuff coming out, bright orange. Yeah, so yeah, and it's usually associated with spruce. I have one here. Let's see. This is one. And sometimes you see these sort of concentric rings here. And when they get older, they have a bit of a funnel shape, but not a really distinctive funnel shape. And maybe I'll break it open. And if you listen, you might hear it. Let's see. I haven't done this before. That's not the best example, is it? But look at inside, you can see bright orange color there. And then I'm going to make you all guinea pigs. I have a lens, a macro lens I'm going to put on my camera here. We'll see if this works. Oh yeah. So you can kind of see this wet, bright orange color along the gills there. This was picked a few hours ago, so already that it's probably not the best example. But if you find a nice young specimen like this, it's not too dry out, you might see better bleeding than this. So that's a orange delicious. Oh, that's the piece I broke off. Here's the main one. So you can see that bright orange layer below the gills. That's where you look for the bleeding. This is cool. With a big group live and in person, you don't really get to see this. And
this is pretty cool though, Sam. This is a cool little feature to add on to the presentation.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I talked about the texture of the stem, how it breaks. So this is one that breaks cleanly, usually. Let's see, it might not do it live, but well, okay, I'll take this off. Okay, that's probably not the best example, but if you were to kick it, it would shatter rather than kind of mush. See if here's a piece here, I'm gonna break it off. Yeah, so it kind of breaks like chalk. So that's a beginner mushroom number one, orange delicious. And number two, are oyster mushrooms. So they are usually maybe the second mushroom to come out in the summer, in late June, say. And I think, unfortunately, these are photos from down south. These aren't Yukon oysters, but you'll see something like this. They usually grow on aspen trees. There's shelves that stick out of the side of trees or outside of logs. They have gills on them. These are actually not great photos. Sorry about that. And they have gills. They have little to no stem. Sometimes the stem is way off to one side. They have a sweet kind of anise smell. And yeah, give them a little nibble. If they taste not burny or hot like a radish, you know, they'd be oyster mushrooms, and they be basically the same oyster mushroom that you get at Independent or Riverside here in Whitehorse, or pretty much anywhere that sells mushrooms these days will sell oyster mushrooms. In fact, there's a company that grows them commercially in Whitehorse. Yeah, so that's oyster. Number three is Shaggy Mains. I know Michenet, the Yukon boreal chef, likes collecting Shaggy Mains and drying them out, and then just grabbing the dried bits and kind of crumpling them into whatever, some of the dishes she cooks, and it adds a certain flavor to it. They are very easy to identify, and yeah, you want them a little bit before this stage here. So maybe when they're young like that and they don't have this blacky stuff coming up, but they have this shaggy top. The older ones will have this black inky mess dripping out. That's the spores kind of liquefying out the bottom. And they're typically, there's several species in that family, but there's only one of that size, and you'll see them in a big group, various different sizes, but they're any of them approaching the size of your hand, then you got a shaggy mane. And just look for the black ink, scaly cap, and in disturbed places, like they're known to push up through asphalt and and grow on the side of roads. Like all mushrooms in their family, and less so with these ones, they interact with alcohol. So if you are drinking a glass of wine while eating them, or if you eat them and even a few days later they say have some alcohol, you might get a bit sick. Personally, I haven't had that problem with Shaggy Mains, but there's others in that family that will do that much stronger than that. So yeah, something to keep in mind. Your sensitivity might vary. So yeah, I'm just gonna recap a little bit here, and then we can have some questions. I got a few more mushrooms to show and tell, if we like. So again, get a guidebook or book or two. Go mushrooming with a friend, preferably an experienced one, and then start slowly by observing mushrooms and talking and looking at your book. And when I say observing, I really mean it. Don't just look at them, but pick them up and break them and smell them and look how they're attached to the soil. Maybe depending on how you feel about them and what you've read, you might taste a little bit of them. Maybe start focusing on one or two easy species and identify them several times so you can see them at all different stages. And that'll grow your confidence with your identification. And even if you're not confident enough to eat them, I think all mushrooms are cool. So just observe them. Even if your goal isn't to eat them, that's fine too. But if your goal is to eat them and you're confident, start by cooking them and eating just a little bit and waiting 24 hours and seeing how you feel. And don't serve it to a group of people. And if you do get confident and you keep you pick the species many times and you eat it all the time, make sure you tell your guests if you serve it to other people, because not all people, other people won't have tested it as you have. And so, there are poisonous mushrooms, so don't be cavalier and silly about it, but have fun. And I think if you're careful and observant and patient, you can do it. You can identify mushrooms, and you don't need to know everything under the sun to have a lot of fun doing it. So yeah, now we can answer questions. I can show a few mushrooms here, I guess.
Yeah. So I do have one question here from Virginia. And so she said that she had a First Nations friend tell her that his family never ate the cap, but only the stem of the orange delicious. So have you heard of that before?
No, I haven't heard a lot of local or traditional knowledge about mushrooms in the Yukon, and I'd love to know more. I think that's pretty interesting. No, I eat the whole thing myself, and I can't think of any species where I'd only eat one part and not the other. Often you'll get some mushrooms where when you cut them open, there'll be a lot of worms in one part and not the other. So you kind of use your common sense there. But yeah, no, I haven't heard that one. That's neat to know.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I don't see any other questions right now, but if you want to show us some more mushrooms, that'd be cool.
Sure. Yeah, I don't have a lot. It's so far, at least around Whitehorse, it hasn't been a really productive fall for mushrooms. It has been an unusual summer. So this is in the genus, or what a family of mushrooms called Agaricus. And this is one that I think beginners jump to pretty quick, the group of mushrooms, because they're fairly common, very delicious. And these are the ones that you get in grocery stores. So the white button mushrooms, or the cremini, or the portobellos, these are all variations of the same species. This one here is probably almost the same species, Agaricus Campestrous, I think. I don't encourage absolute beginners to go out and pick them and eat them right away, because there are inedible ones around. I've run into it maybe once or twice in the Yukon, and they are, at first anyway, hard to distinguish the good from the bad. And so, but I encourage beginners to know about the genus Agaricus because they're wonderful. They're one of my favorite ones to eat. There's maybe 4 species commonly found in the Yukon. Oligaricus will look like a portobello, roughly. Sometimes they're more pale. You remember the slide with the 3 button mushrooms? Those were Agaricus that hadn't opened yet. So they often start white or off-white. Sometimes they look like a marshmallow coming up. And if you rub them, some species will get a bit yellow. That's okay. So that's a staining reaction. Some will have sort of brownish scales along the outside, especially when they're older. Typically, they have a ring around the stem. So you can see the ring here hanging down. And when they're young, like the button stage, the gills can be white or pink, but with age, they turn chocolate brown. So they have a chocolate brown spore print. So if you see chocolate brown spores, if you do the spore print and you saw that it had pinkish gills before, you know it's an Agaricus. There's no doubt about it. But how to tell if it's edible without a lot of experience, it's tricky, but I go by smell. I think that's the best way to go about it. If you smell it and it smells like a mushroom or a bit like anise or is a bit sweet and pleasant, then it's typically edible. It is edible, but the trouble is, do you trust your nose? And I think that takes a bit of experience, but I've smelt the inedible ones before and they smell chemically, the books will call it phenolic. To me, it smells like some kind of cleaning product and is not really edible. Yeah, so the ones that let's see, this is Campestrous, it looks like. I have trouble, admittedly, telling some examples of one species from the other, if you know what I mean. So some are distinctly one species, and other individuals are distinctly the other species. And then some individuals, it's hard to tell just because of the environment they grow in. But this looks like Campestrous, which is basically a field mushroom. You might find it growing on a lawn. It's usually associated with some kind of disturbance, and it will have brownish kind of cap in the older ones. It'll smell like a mushroom, quite nice. There's Woodland Agaricus, which looks more pale and will grow in woodlands. It'll have a bent stem, kind of like this one. And when you rub it, the cap, it'll turn a bit yellow, bruise a bit yellow. And then there's the Prince mushroom, which can get really big, and it will have that bruising of yellow as well, but it will have striations like this, brown kind of striations but will yellow with handling. And that's a wonderful mushroom to have. I don't really have a firm grasp of where it grows ecologically. It's saprobic, so it rots stuff in the soil. Usually there's a bit of disturbance. That was that massive mushroom that I found near Carcross at one of my walks a few years ago, but you'll find it around almost anywhere in the Yukon.
So we have a couple more questions here.
Okay, good. Sure.
So Justine, she says that she has picked what she thinks are Agaricus Augustus many times up here, but note that the scales on the cap look much more subtle than those I have picked down south. Do you think these are the same species or something slightly different?
All right. Well, that's a really good observation. Well, I would say there is Agaricus Augustus. That's the prince that I was describing. I'll see if I can get that picture up here. Yeah, I would say they are the same species, but there's a lot of diversity within the same species in mushrooms. And in a place like the Yukon, there hasn't been a lot of thorough research. So sometimes biologists will talk about cryptic species where they are biologically different species, but they look identical. And someone with a lot of experience, sounds like you may have, Justine, they could be different species. I think in this case, that is a prince, Agaricus Augustus. And that is on the cover of Mushrooms Demystified. And let's see, yeah, these, and I'll just share the screen here. I think this is an Agaricus Augustus button here, and it's quite pale when young. You can kind of see these scales here, but scaly brown. The scales, though, don't really stick out. So if you rub your finger on them with your eyes closed, you don't really feel them. They don't really stick out, but they look like scales. And unfortunately, I didn't get the picture of the other side, but this is a Augustus on the other side. You can kind of see it's a little more brown here, but I didn't get the flip side here in the slide deck. But yeah, they usually will have a browner cover. Whereas this would have a scaly surface. This is a totally different mushroom altogether. If you close your eyes and touch the top of that, you'd feel them as distinct kind of warts or bumps. Not to confuse things too much. Was there another question?
Yeah, so there is another question from Virginia, and she asks, if you don't cook it fresh, is it better to freeze or dry mushrooms?
I think that's personal choice of what you like to do. Myself, if you freeze, I don't think it's ever recommended to freeze mushrooms fresh. So if freezing's quite convenient, but I think you want to saute them first and then bag them up and freeze them. Otherwise, you can dry them fresh and not cook them. Yeah, so it depends on what you're set up for. What I like to do with dried mushrooms is you can rehydrate them with warm water for not too long before, or warm milk even, or cream. And then you keep the fluid that you've rehydrated them and incorporate that in your meal, the same dish or another dish that you're cooking as well. So like a classic example of that for me is a risotto. So risotto is, you may know, you fry up the rice and then you add stock to it. Well, you have stock that comes from rehydrating your mushroom, and you just kind of pour that in, and then you add you can add wine and other stuff too. And the flavor, when you rehydrate mushrooms, a lot of the flavor comes out in the water that you rehydrated in. So you want to put that back in your dish. In Morels, I've done that with cream and other things too. And the cream can go in your eggs if you're doing scrambled eggs or something.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, that's what I like. Keep in mind. I got a couple more mushrooms. I don't know. Yeah. So this is the nickname for this one is Hideous gone Phidias, and it's not the best example of it, but look at that. It's got decurrent gills that run down the stem. Kind of looks like a funnel-shaped cap, but it doesn't quite have the indent in this example. The gills look a bit white, but also a bit smoky. So this is one case when they're young, they got really pale gills, but then they darken with age because it has almost black spores. The black spores have caught in a ring here. It doesn't really have a defined ring, but the spores have kind of stuck on almost an invisible sticky layer from when the residue from when the cap was touching the stem. And usually the foot at the very base of the stem is bright yellow, and this is not the best example. So you might see a bit of yellowness. I think the worms got to this one a bit. Yeah, it's a bit yellow there. So that's a gone Phidias. I think that's usually around spruce trees and is often slimy. Looks kind of gross, but it is edible, but I don't know, not super great. This one is, where are we at? You can see the pores underneath there. So you might call it a bolete. It's a slippery jack. It's in the slippery jack group of boletes. So it's in a different genus or family, but you can call it a bolete. And it in Yukon, they only grow under pine trees, and there's two or three species of slippery jacks. They usually have a yellow tone to them, yellowish pores underneath. The pores are a bit bigger than other boletes, and their stem is smooth. They don't have that net. They don't have those black bumps of the Aspen Bullets. And they, in my opinion, they're kind of a beginner mushroom, but they're not great tasting. They're kind of slimy. They get quite wet when cooked. And yeah, so personally, I don't collect them anymore, but they are fairly safe to collect in that they're pretty easily identified. So I'm going to see if I can get a staining reaction out of it. So that's kind of, that mustard color is kind of what you get when you pick it, but I'll pinch it and we'll see if it changes color. Maybe I'll rip a bit out. I'm doing a mushroom walk tomorrow, so I might bring these tomorrow just in case we don't find any. You can kind of see a bit of bluing there. So I think it was a slippery jack in the slide I showed earlier that showed the blue staining. That's maybe a bad example. The light's getting bad also.
You can see it a bit though. It's
yeah, you can, right?
starting to go.
Yeah, you can see the tubes are bruising up above for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, right in the corner there, you can see how blue it is. It's not a trick of the light. So that's, I forget. I used to know all the species of slippery jacks. I forget this one. There's a woolly slippery jack, and anyhow, that's one of them. And here's a little puffball. I think sounds like the audience today know quite a bit about mushrooms, so this is nothing new to them. But yeah, again, if you cut it open and it's white inside, it's safe to eat. But this one feels puffy and old. Yeah. So that's all I have for us today.
All right. Let me just switch this up here. There we go. Let me just see if there's any more questions here. Justine just mentioned that's a poor man's slippery jack.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Sam. This was really great. I definitely learned a lot as well, because I definitely don't know a whole bunch about mushrooms. And thank you everybody who came tonight to watch. I'm really pleased with how this all worked out. It sounds like you could hear us just fine. And I saw there was quite a few people that were watching. And yeah, we do have 2 mushroom walks happening this week. So hopefully some of you guys who are here tonight signed up for those. They are by registration only. I do believe we are sold out, but you know, always put your name on a wait list. I check all of that stuff tomorrow. So if anybody drops out throughout the day, we'll go off the wait list and add others on. So for any of our Wild Discoveries events, it's at yukon.ca/wild discoveries. And yeah, thanks again, Sam. This was awesome.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to unlive ourselves. Bye, everyone.